So with that, I will pass it over first to Oliver, and then to Stephen to give a 5-minute introduction.
Yeah, thanks and thanks for the invitation. How did I get into ocean rainforest? Is a question that's been posed to me, and it really is related to that. Some 15 years ago, a young researcher came to me and said he had this idea that to grow seaweed in the around the Faroe Islands. Um, he didn't know exactly how to do it, but he wanted to develop some infrastructure or technology so that where we could grow seaweed in offshore conditions, which we have a lot of in the North Atlantic around the Faroe Islands. And he asked me to help him with getting funding for that. That's how it started. And after 5 years, we had tested the technology, but the researcher who came with the idea said, I have enough. This will take too long time. So I want to go back into research. And I then decided after a talk with my wife that I would like to continue the company. And this is in 2012. And that's basically how it started for me. And the main reason is, or was, and still is, I found it extremely exciting to see what we could do if we have a cultivation system that is scalable in open ocean condition. We can grow a biomass just by using the photosynthesis or light, the natural nutrients, and then it can take up CO2 as it grows. And we can use it for replacing or for food and feed and replacing fossil-based products. That's how it started for me. And since then, it has been a lot of work on trying to understand how we can make this a business, this idea into a business. And today we are mainly producing feed or feed ingredient based on a fermentation process that we have developed with a main customer of ours for that. And in the recent years, we have, of course, been in different areas. Mainly drying the seaweed and salt into food, and also to companies that have been extracting bioactive compounds from the seaweed. But in the recent years, we have put more effort into understanding how we can produce biostimulants from the seaweed we are cultivating. And it is a part of the story also that today we are cultivating seaweed both in the North Atlantic, the Saccharina latissima is the predominant species we are cultivating here, and in the Pacific where we are cultivating Macrocystis or giant kelp. So today we are producing biostimulants and both together with feed. So very much into agriculture and livestock. We have scaled down significantly production into food or sales into the food sector. We are still keen to supply to those who are interested in the bioactive compounds, for instance, for Phyconomy, in the Saccharina we are cultivating. Um, but that's in short, that's where we are in terms of products. And otherwise, what I think is fascinating or what drives me on a daily basis to do this work. Um, it's first and foremost the meaningfulness of what we are doing with building this new industry in the Western Hemisphere, at least. Uh, I am born and raised here in the Faroe Islands, where I'm based right now. We are surrounded by the ocean. If we want to do anything of industry on these islands, we have to use the ocean. And I saw this as a new innovative opportunity. I've been an entrepreneur all my life, so I like challenges. And when we, when I look back 5 years ago, we were six, seven people working on ocean rainforest on a daily basis. Today, when I take the full group, as we say, we are 70 people scattered around three different countries, Mexico, US or California, and the Faroes. And but we are not only based in the Faroes, we have staff in several countries in Europe, working remotely. So having been a part of that process have been very fascinating as well. And we really believe that now we are reaching a stage where we can make an impact, which I think is the main drive in all what we do, and also the shareholders that have invested in ocean rainforest is the impact we can make in terms of both improving the ocean environment when we are cultivating and harvesting the seaweed, but also when we are producing biostimulants and also to a certain extent trying to replace synthetic and chemical-based fungicides that we can improve the soil, the biodiversity, and in general reducing the carbon footprint in the food production chain.
Right. Thank you so much, Oliver. So much exciting things happening, like going from a small team of 5 to 6 people, now 70 people. I want to hear more about the acquisition. I want to hear more about a lot of things that you said. But for now, let's go ahead and give Stephen his 5 minutes so folks can get to know him as well. So Stephen, over to you.
Thank you, Tessa. For me, how did I get into seaweeds? I think it was very much like a theoretical exercise. Like I didn't live close to the ocean like Oliver. I'm not a marine scientist or a surfer or anything like that. So it really came from like a more, I think, a very European perspective and thinking about the future bioeconomy, where everything which is currently made from petroleum would in the future need to be made from another biomass. And then very quickly, you come to realize that there isn't enough land on the planet to grow all that biomass. And that sort of leads you to the ocean, and seaweeds is kind of like the first thing. It seems like a logical solution. So that was kind of one thread that really interested me. And then another thing was that nobody, I felt like seaweeds, it seems so interesting. And definitely at the time, 2019, 2020, there was a lot of, a lot of positive media coverage about seaweeds. And so it felt like this is just amazing. How come, we should be learning more about that, and why isn't anyone writing about it? And so I felt somebody should do it. I had some time on my hand, and I like to cover these kind of places where, that are kind of underlit and that they don't really have enough attention. So previously, I was writing a travel guide for Central Asia. So to me, seaweeds felt a little bit like where Tajikistan was 10 years ago. Like more people wanted to get to know about it, but nobody was really writing about it or telling people what they needed to know. And so it felt like just interesting to jump in. And this was 2020. There was no travel, so I had a lot of time on my hands. And from a personal perspective, I like to travel to remote places, and those are the places that seaweed tends to grow, where people tend to cultivate or harvest seaweeds. And then finally, I think I was also thinking about money, about investment finance. I was thinking, how can I get people to invest in something that I think seems like, something I believe in, and away from things that I don't believe in, like let's say Bitcoin. So how can I get people to take some money out of Bitcoin and put it into seaweeds? And the answer was, they need some more information. People don't want to invest in seaweeds because they don't understand it. They don't have the necessary data to make a good decision. So why don't I try to provide that? So that's how it started, I would say. And then, here we are 5 years later. And I feel like many of the original questions that I had are kind of answered. I think 5 years ago, there was all the talk about what's the role of seaweeds as a climate solution. Back then, there was a lot of talk about sequestration, running tide, all those kind of people were very active. That kind of, so that has run its course. And now the focus is clearly on mitigation. And so I think that was like an important question that we collectively answered. And yeah, I think the contours of the markets are sort of a bit more clear, and definitely around agri inputs, biostimulants, etc. We know a lot more where we are, where it's going, and I think it's the same for these other new markets, biomaterials, etc. We more or less know where we are, and probably not as far as people wanted to go, but yeah, I think there's a lot more clarity already now than 5 years ago. So that's kind of what I was hoping to achieve, and I think together we sort of we've gotten there, and to a certain degree. That's it.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for the intro. I think it's really clear from both of your introductions how sort of nascent and new the seaweed industry is, but also how far it's come in the past 5 or even 10 years. Um, so thank you for your introductions, both of you. So the first question I wanted to start with is one about given your work in your respective regions, how do you view the seaweed landscape in Asia and in Europe and North America? Like, what are the similarities? What are the differences? What sort of technologies and innovations do you see from each region that are exciting? And I think what's exciting about having both of you on the call is this unique perspective that you are sort of experts in your region. So, Stephen, because you're still up on my screen, I'll go to you first.
Yes, what kind of technologies? I think, well, it's if looking at Asia, then I'll do the Asian bit. I think it's very different, right? It's a very big region, and you can't compare, let's say, Japan to Indonesia. So I think when you think of a country like Japan, for instance, there you see a lot of sort of high precision land based aquaculture. That's sort of where it's going. If you look at the sort of tropical seaweeds, not much has moved really in the past 20 years in terms of cultivation. We do see C6 Energy, and they've come with some automation, and I think that's very important because it's a hard job to be a seaweed farmer, and there does need to be some kind of evolution there. And then I think the other thing that's exciting that I sort of see developing over the past just year and a half is so the IMTA seaweed shrimp co-culture. It's nothing new, science has been doing these experiments and trials for like 10, 15, 20 years. But it seems like now for the first time there's really implementation and people actually taking those things on board. And it's good for the shrimp. It's good for the farmers, so they get a double crop. And yeah, I kind of see only benefits, but then it's about implementing it. And so I think that's kind of interesting. And then yeah, there's China, which is kind of a world on its own, and I can't really say much about it because it's kind of difficult to penetrate.
Stephen. Oliver, over to you.
Yeah, well, thanks. I can perhaps take it a bit more than from a Western hemisphere perspective. I think the first big difference is that in Asia you have a seaweed cultivation industry. I think that is to stress it quite a lot to say that we have that in the Western Hemisphere. I think we have had several endeavors, entrepreneurial endeavors to build an industry. And there are fortunately some companies that are have been able to do work that have demonstrated and brought us forward. But I still think there's a way to go before we are at the stage where we can where I think we should be. The first big difference is, I think that is of course the scale that you are working at in Asia, which there is an advantage that you have a market around you that uses seaweed on a daily basis as a food. We don't have that in the Western Hemisphere in the same way. I think a difference is also, I mean, we heard from Stephen about the way it is done today, and it has probably not changed that much in terms of how cultivation is carried out, and it's quite laborative or labor intensive. I think that there has been, in general, a tendency to try how can we automate and make things at a more in a more mechanized, automated way, also in a scale in Europe and US. But I also think that the progress has been limited. However, there's one big difference as we see it, at least, and now I become a bit much related to ocean rainforest. What we have focused a lot on since we started is to try to understand how can we cultivate seaweed in very exposed areas, also on deeper water. And based on the exchange of knowledge we had with South Korea, I think we learned that we are doing things differently, and we are doing things, at least in the Faroes, potentially also outside California, in a way that could be of interest in Asia when it comes to cultivation technologies. But I think it's mainly because it has not been necessary yet in Asia to do it on such exposed areas as we have been operating on basically since we started. But now there is and there seems to be an interest to move further ashore because of the warming waters. So I think that there is, based on that, I would hope actually that there is reason for some kind of collaboration between East and West. And then there is another very important area when we are talking cultivation, and that is selective breeding that Asia has been doing for decades. And there we have a lot to learn. I mean, there's yield improvements that needs to happen in the Western Hemisphere that can only happen with the selective breeding, and there's great room for collaboration on that area.
Thank you, Oliver. I guess you sort of answered my next question partly, which was, part of our work is we try to build a bridge to Asia and Southeast Asia. So, and you hear a lot about what you just said. We need to collaborate between different regions. So what specifically can the two regions learn from each other? So you said one, selective breeding, increasing yield in the West. Were there any other specific ways you can think about that collaboration is useful?
As I said, I mean, we have had two Korean delegations here in the Faroes, I think, and one in California, and it is mainly and in both cases, I think they have been they were curious about the way we are cultivating in these exposed waters. So I think that there is a potential for knowledge exchange on that extent. But I also have learned that there is a cultural dimension to cultivation, at least in the Korean side. This is the one that I know most of, but I think I would not be surprised if it's the same in other areas. So you have a community way of working with seaweed cultivation or a legacy where going into a more larger scale ocean-based cultivation, there might be some, you could almost say, cultural or normative conflicts in the way you operate. But I don't know enough about it. But I can see that there is some potential conflicts there. But and then there is and I don't know to what extent we have progress enough in Europe or US on extraction and conversion of the raw seaweed biomass into bioactive sellable compounds compared to work that has been going on in Asia. I sometimes think that we are doing a good job here in the West. Sometimes I'm in doubt.
A healthy amount of skepticism is always good. Um, Stephen, just really quickly, do you have any perspectives on how the two regions can collaborate? And something that Oliver said about the cultural aspect of it, given your work being on the ground, visiting so many seaweed farms in Southeast Asia and Asia as a whole. Do you have any insight into that?
Yes, I think if Europe and Asia would collaborate, it would be more with temperate seaweeds, right? China, Korea, those are, I would say, the two main countries. And it's on the one hand, it's very difficult to see like what can Asia get from Europe. They have the market, they have the knowledge, they're growing the seaweeds. Like what can they possibly get from Europe or US? But if I think a little bit sort of in the future, you do see that they are struggling to grow or to maintain even their volumes. If you look at the numbers of the past few years, and they are also reaching certain just like natural limits. And if they want to grow more, they need to go further offshore. So that's one thing that Europe and US still has is empty water in a place like Alaska, Canada, Norway, Faroe Islands, and so perhaps they can bring the money and the knowledge. And I think on the Europe US side, there are definitely some people doing interesting things in technology, in science. So there's some exchange possible. But yeah, I think especially, and there might be an option for this kind of joint venture or just like people using the waters of Europe, US. I don't know if they would choose Europe or US, if perhaps they would prefer to go to Chile. I'm not sure, but I could see that this would be a future, especially also thinking about if you want to grow, let's say nori for the European market, would be nice to just grow it in Europe. Then you don't have to deal with all the safety, food security things, etc. So these are just kind of theoretical ideas. I don't really know how that would play out on the ground. I think there's a reason why it hasn't happened yet, because it is quite complicated. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for your theories, Stephen. I want to turn now to focus a bit on Oliver and ocean rainforest. Oliver, given that seaweed is, a relatively new field in the Northern Hemisphere, but you've been in the space for a long time, well, over a decade now. What are some of the challenges you've faced when building ocean rainforest and scaling the company? How have you overcome them? And also I was curious about, you have operations in the Faroe Islands and Iceland and California. Can you tell us also why you chose to be in more than one geographic location?
Yeah, I mean, when I started, my background is economics, business economics. So when I started, this was a completely new area for me. So the first thing was to learn how to work with seaweed in the ocean, and the first full-time employee we had was Urde Bak, doing an industrial PhD on figuring out what can we grow in the waters around the Faroes, and how we can grow it. So I would say the first 5 years were very much related to biology and to some extent technology. Then and there was interest, as Steven said. I mean, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, the interest for seaweed really started to pick up, and there was a lot of we have always sold everything that we have harvested. So we didn't really start to think about market and products before 5, 6 years ago, when we got into a scale of production, was okay. There's not just enough to look at the people calling in and asking, "Can we get some seaweed from you?" We actually have to have a more structured approach to that. And so today, I will say that the challenge is not the biology or to make the seaweed grow. It's much more to understand the right product market mix that fits to what you can grow and produce of biomass, and also the cost of that. And I think that the cost aspect has been neglected far too much when we are talking seaweed cultivation in the Northern Hemisphere, because in niche markets you can sell almost everything, but if you really want to make it an industry, you need to match costs either at products you're replacing or what can be imported from Asia, which is typically they have a cost that is hard to compete with. So you have to have a product that have functionalities that makes it desirable, or where you have a value proposition that really is attractive for buyers in Europe or US. I think understanding that and working with that has been challenging for us, also because it takes time and it requires funding, and because you have to have people to work with it, and you have to have fairly good people in order to get good results. So going to that market development, product development process, and we are still in it. I mean, it's not like we are there. We are fortunately gaining traction and getting revenue, but that has been challenging. While the stuff we are doing in the ocean, it has definitely its challenges, both from about, I mean, now we are looking much more how can we optimize the engineering rather than come up with something that can last. But we feel fairly on safe ground there, if I may use that expression. And the biology we also understand, but we would like to do more selective breeding. But all that is something we can see as something we can control one way or the other, or we can set it into a controlled development phase one way or the other. But the market part can be much more tricky.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. I think your answer really highlights how multifaceted running a business in the seaweed space is. It's not just the growing and cultivation, it's the market, the product market fit, it's the
Yeah,
cost, it's all of
yeah,
that.
and if I can say that, because you had another question, why have we spread ourselves, so to say? And I realized, and this was partly also, as I said, I've being in the Faroe Islands, I've seen how the salmon farming industry started here back in the 80s, early 80s. I'm afraid I went that old. And I've seen the boost and bone cycles that they faced. And one what really helped them in becoming a successful industry as they are today, that was the understanding the importance of vertical integration of the processes that are critical for producing the product. And that is something that I realize, at least, that we should try to aim for that. And we have, in the last 3, 4 years, really looked into how can we integrate our processes from the hatchery we are having today to cultivation, get into a product portfolio that can match the market needs we are looking at. So we are cultivating seaweed in the Faroe Islands and processing here, because here we have access to the Saccharina latissima in the North Atlantic, which have a certain market potential. But then we have California, where we have Macrocystis or giant kelp, that is a very good replacement for the wild harvested Ascophyllum that is very often used for in biostimulants today. And we realized 2 years ago that we needed to develop products for biostimulants. And 1 year ago, we got the opportunity to acquire the majority of a Mexican company that have these products and have a revenue in Mexico and have an interest to expand into US and Europe. And that is basically why we acquired the company Algamar, the majority of Algamar. Um, that was to accelerate our path to market on the biostimulant area, because otherwise I saw we needed to spend 4 or 5 years in product development before we had products that we could compete with others on the biostimulant market.
I'm really glad you mentioned the acquisition because I was going to ask about that. And Stephen, in his one of his articles at the end of last year, mentioned the trend of mergers and acquisitions. Um, so, Stephen, if I could go to you and sort of ask, which segments of the seaweed industry do you anticipate seeing the most consolidation in the coming years? And what might be the key drivers of these deals? And especially, what are some implications for investors and what kind of partnerships do you expect to see with the trend of mergers and acquisitions to come?
Well, I think I would say biostimulants. So in Oliver's case, it was because they wanted to drive, and they didn't want to do like the 5 years of trials and just to get those first customers. I think for future, let's say mergers or acquisitions or just people coming together in biostimulant section, it's just there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of people who are making a biostimulant, and yeah, I would say ultimately it will consolidate. Some people are going to be successful, and they're going to swallow up some of the smaller companies, and ultimately get bought out by the big agrochemical companies. So I think biostimulants is kind of, let's say, the first sector where that happened is the hydrocolloid sector. And it's like over the past 25 years, we've seen just wave after wave of consolidation in carrageenan and agar and alginates, to the point where there's like three big companies in Europe and US, and then a bunch in China as well, and that's it. And they dominate that whole market. And at the moment, we have these 100 biostimulant companies that sort of reflects what was happening in hydrocolloids like 25 years ago. And so we'll see that number dwindle and people consolidate. So yeah, and then on the cultivation side, I think Oliver is sort of, or Ocean Rainforest went continuing in vertical integration. I see other people were sort of moving away from that, and sort of specializing either in the cultivation technology or the breeding, or just like delivering the crop, or just doing the product, the application. And so I see mostly in Europe and US more specialization and cooperation rather than vertical integration, rather more like a splitting up.
Great, thank you. Just a reminder to the audience, then about 5 minutes, we'll open it up to audience questions. So get your questions ready if you have any. Then we're seeing an influx of impact-aligned investors who are becoming more interested in seaweed, especially because of the impact side. I'm curious, how do you think investors can be thinking about the social and environmental impact of seaweed farming beyond the financial returns?
Yeah, if I can start, I think the environmental impact is fairly obvious. I think we have more and more science on the positive impact we have on the ocean environment where we are cultivating seaweed. We have in the recent years, especially through the European funded project CMARC, done what we call ecosystem services measurements around our lines, counted how many species of different creatures, so to say, ocean species that we have on our lines. Basically, having to prove for the nourishing chamber that we are creating by cultivating in the ocean. And we have not worked so much on the carbon play, on the cultivation. We have been much more focused on the ecosystem services we provide, also with bioremediation when we are cultivating, because of the excess nutrients that are submitted into the ocean environment. And then we have focused on how can we produce a product with as low carbon footprint as possible, and thereby have something to offer in a food supply chain. And so for our impact investors, I think there's definitely metrics there to go for. And on the social environment, well, today we are in the Faroe Islands. I think we are around 15 working with the seaweed cultivation here, and we are you could say a rural coastal community. The interesting thing is, of those 15, 12 or so have an academic degree. And we are usually, I haven't done a head count lately, but usually we are 40-50% females and males. So we are creating a job opportunity in rural coastal areas that are attractive for, and I have to say as well, the a young people that want to make a difference in industry, and we have seen that very literally. And as just as an example, we every year we ask for trainees, or we open up for trainee applications, and we get between 60 and 80 applicants every year, even though we are based in the outskirts of the world, and they come from all over Europe and US, these applicants. And many of those that we hire as a trainee, we end up hiring as a full-time employee. So there's a social impact as well.
Oliver, just a quick follow-up question to that. We know you're also working on your first impact report, which is very exciting. Why did you decide to do that now? Could you share what it's been like to measure, track, and report these aspects of your business?
I would say that the impact report is much better fitted for us in 2 or 3 or 5 years when we are much bigger than we are today. However, we wanted to set up the structure of it today or now, because we all or most of our investors, they categorize themselves as impact investors, or they have big interest in impact. So we could see that we need to communicate to our investors in a structured manner about the impact we can do. So that's why we decided to go for it, and we hope that that can be a help for the investors and their backyard, so to say, to communicate what they have invested their money in. And it is also a matter, a way from us to create awareness within the organization, all over, wherever we are, about the importance of impact, because it is a part of the key mission drive for us as a company. That is the impact we can make.
Thank you, Oliver. Stephen, anything to add on the impact side?
Well, maybe I think so. Looking at Southeast Asia, since that's the sort of potatoes' main area of focus, I think there's a lot of focus on livelihoods and how can we help these seaweed farmers. And I think for me, but this is a personal take. I think mainly we should also try to get them better jobs. If you see or if you talk to like seaweed farmers and you ask them like, do your kids want to do it? I say, no. I tell my kids, don't become a seaweed farmer, right? And just like, go to the city, get an education, get a job. So in general, these are still like very a country like Indonesia. There's maybe like 70% of people are farmers, are working in agriculture, so smallholder farmers, and they are going through the same transition that sort of more developed countries have gone through. This is going to go down like a lot steeply, right? So there will be fewer farmers, and hopefully these will be better educated farmers, and we will get to a place like ocean rainforest where these will be academically educated farmers who are attracted to come back to stay in their sort of rural places, because there are interesting jobs in seaweed farming, and not just the drudgery of doing the same kind of hard labor or boring, so tying seaweed onto a rope. So I think that should be a goal looking into the sort of midterm future of seaweeds, that if it's going to stay the same how seaweed farming is happening today, this is not interesting to young people. And so we do need to offer people jobs that are more than just a way to survive, which is what seaweed often is for people in these places, and just a lifeline when all the fish is bombed away, and you're just living on your little rock there in the middle of the sea. So yeah, how can we turn seaweed from just something that you hold on to survive to something that will help you thrive? And so yeah, I think that's something to consider. Yeah.
Yes, can I just add on what Stephen just said? Because I think, Stephen, you are touching on something that I find extremely exciting and interesting, and also with respect to social impact. When you have an industry where their parents are telling their kids, "Don't get in here, go find something else," that's a dying industry. It's time for that industry to change modus operandi so it becomes attractive for the young people, because otherwise there's no point in that. And we have seen that in fisheries also in the Faroes. And we have seen how that fisheries have transitioned from very hard labor, high risk, into something else that becomes very attractive for young people to get into. There's not as many people, but they make a better living. It's less risky, and it's easier to work with. Our approach to seaweed cultivation has always been, we need to understand the bioactive compounds in the seaweed that we can grow, and how we can use that in a meaningful way to basically replace fossil-based products, or make food and feed more healthier, or improve biodiversity on the planet. This is something that is attractive, is meaningful for young people. And of course, when we are focusing on the molecular level of the biomass, we need people with education, and we very fast go away from the hard labor part to looking into how can we make this efficient. How can we automate? How can we mechanize? How can we monitor, rather than using our hands to make it move? So I often say we have to come to a point where we don't ever touch the seaweed. We harvest it, we process it, and we sell it in a product. Then we have a business that can work in the Western world. I think Asia will probably go in the same direction, of the same reasons you're saying, Steve.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you so much for those insights.